This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, joined today by Corey Walsh and Jackson Flickinger. Unfortunately, we're having some difficulties, so their cameras are not on, but don't worry, trust me, they are there. You can find this show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We would really appreciate if you followed us on all of those platforms to help boost our numbers. Leave a 5-star rating, give us a like, do all of that stuff if you want to support us. We can't thank you enough. We also can't thank Kenny Atkinson enough for revamping this entire Cavalier offense and delivering good vibes in the first game of preseason. I've never felt so good after a loss personally. And now, you already know what I'm going to say. It's just the preseason, so we're not going to get ahead of ourselves.
I do have a really quick question.
Go ahead.
Did you feel really good about that Craig Porter Jr. 3 at the end of the game?
I did not. I didn't plan on talking about Craig today, but Craig Porter Island, it's getting rough. It's seen way better days. I knew that possession was going to be bad. I don't know. I guess we can give Kenny a knock here. I don't know what he was drawing up. I just think no one wanted to go to overtime. So they're like, yeah, just, let Craig ISO at the top of the key and get blocked on a three-pointer. And by the way, not to interrupt you, but I don't care that he got fouled. It was a bad shot. It was a bad possession. It doesn't change my opinion on that.
Is Craig Porter Island in the way of a Hurricane Milton?
That is
it might be
question.
Right in the middle of it.
Yeah, Kenny did say afterwards that there was a play drawn up to get to the corner, but then he was like, I'm kind of happy that, at least he took a 3 so we didn't have to go to overtime. So I think
that's what they wanted.
I wouldn't be too disappointed about that play in particular, but I just kind of wanted to see him do something, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on him looking exactly the same.
Yeah, no, it was a repeat of his summer league performance. We've seen better days, but I'm not, we haven't lost all hope. We'll get there. We'll get there. I want to start off with this preface by saying, of course, it is preseason. It's only preseason. So whether you're really high on a player or really low, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But what fun would it be if we didn't get a little carried away every now and then? So, Corey, you don't have to drop any spicy hot takes, but what was your overall reaction to yesterday's game?
Pace was definitely the name of the game. It really just seemed like all of the chatter we heard about the Kenny Atkinson offense and what it was going to do for this Cavs team really came to fruition. I mean, it got to the point where I think Danny Cunningham tweeted something out, or I read it on one of his posts where he said the Cavs were averaging starting possessions with 19 seconds into the shot clock, which is pretty insane, seeing as we felt like a commonality of this offense last year was how long is it going to take for the Cavs to actually action some offense? We got into the possessions where it just feel like they were kind of cramming stuff in with 10 seconds or less on the clock, and we're just standing around. I mean, they were in the bottom 10 in pace last year, so just to see them kind of running at the pace that they were at was just jarring, I think, for a lot of Cavs fans as a whole. Is it the pace that I think we're honestly going to play going in through the whole season? Definitely not. But I think this was just a point that Kenny Atkinson wanted to make, being this is how the offense can run, but it's not going to run like this, obviously, all the time, because that was just an absolute barn burner of an offense.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest takeaway, other than any individual performance, was just the overall offense, the way it was moving and grooving. I know the roster hasn't changed, but I do think Kenny could have this team looking very different on the court with the way they play. We're still going to see a lot of the same stuff. There's going to be a lot of high pick and roll, high usage for the two guards, but we do want to see everyone get involved, and I think that's an emphasis that Kenny has. We want to see them play at a faster pace, move the ball around. They ran a pin down for Dean Wade like he was Kevin Durant to hit a foul line jumper. So that's what I want to see. Get him some easy buckets. If Dean is just doing cardio for 25 minutes and then takes a standstill 3-pointer once a week, it's kind of difficult to get a rhythm. But if you get an easy in-motion shot, even if you miss, just get him involved. I think that stuff's really important, and I think Kenny is going to focus on it.
I do want to say that, JB was talking about this time in preseason last year about how he wanted to play faster, and the Cavs were actually playing considerably faster in preseason than they ended up actually doing. So I do want to just throw a little bit of cold water on that, whereas I do think there's a lot more reason to be optimistic that they'll continue to do this because Kenny seems like he really wants to do this. And whereas like at times it felt like JB was told he had to do this and didn't really believe in it. I do want to point that out, but Dean Wade was probably the thing that I took away from this game more than anything besides Evan Mobley, just because he's in training camp. He did seem like he was a lot more like he was not gun shy and he kind of had a plan on the offensive side of the ball. And we saw that come through, even though the results weren't there. I gave him an A on my Fear the Sword thing. The commenters didn't like it, but I thought the process was really good. Yeah. I was like,
I thought he had a good game.
And they were mad about Karis LeVert not getting a high enough grade. I was like, guys, what do we think? Like it was just a Karis LeVert game.
it was just a regular Karis LeVert game. And
Yeah.
I do agree. We got to see like pace is naturally going to be faster in the preseason. Guys are going to shoot a lot of 3-pointers because no one really cares. So like we got to wait and see if that will translate. I do want to start with Dean Wade just because I would say, I know Jackson mentioned this on one of the previous pods, but watch for Dean Wade under Kenny Atkinson. I think he's one of the more underrated guys who could benefit from this coaching style. I know for me personally, like you just kind of forget how lanky, rangy, and athletic he actually is on defense. He's such a good perimeter defender, sneakily one of the best perimeter guys in the league. He slides his feet. He can elevate and provide some rim protection, contesting drives. Like he had back-to-back contests at the rim where he altered the shot last night and got a stop. So he's just really good on that end of the floor. And it's the same key as always. You got to get more out of him offensively. He has shooting touch. He just hasn't really put it together. If he shoots anywhere from, let's say 35 to 40% on 5 attempts per game, for reference, he attempted a career high 3.7 last year. So another jump might not be realistic, but I don't think it's impossible if Kenny is emphasizing this. And I just think you should look to maximize Dean because he really does have the tools to be an elite role player on both ends of the floor. So I'm excited to see how this pans out.
Yeah, and it'll be nice to see players like Dean Wade get more integrated with the starting lineup. I think last night's game was it was nice, but you kind of only really saw the starters really run together. And the only reason that Dean or Merrill even got minutes was solely because of the Max Strus injury. I think if Max Strus wasn't even injured, there was a possibility that we weren't even going to see those minutes. And I feel like that's where Dean really kind of shined, is when he was being able to run with the core four for the most part. I think other role players in this Atkinson offense, when given those types of opportunities, not necessarily with all four, but just some runway with some of the lead dogs in the offense, it's going to open things up a lot more for them. I think a lot of the issues with the Cavs last year was, yes, we knew the core four was going to do what they were going to do if they were healthy, but it was also a lot of the supplementary players kind of felt more like they just were told to do one thing and get locked into that spot. And if Dean Wade, Sam Merrill, even Karis LeVert, I guess in this example, if they can open up even more, kind of unlock more of what makes them NBA players versus just one skill level players, then the Atkinson offense is going to be a success in more than one way. Than did Evan Mobley take the leap? Did Darius get more comfortable? It's going to be, does this offense actually make sense, or does it truly revolve only around 4 players?
Yeah, we saw a lot of 5 in, 5 out substitutions last night from Kenny, so we didn't get to see too much of like how the starters or the core will mesh with Dean Wade, but saw a little bit of it. And one last thing I want to hit on with Wade before we move on is the broadcast mentioned that he spent the summer strength training and working on his joints. So really a concentrated effort on how can we keep him healthy long term. And that's the big key, other than just his confidence and being involved offensively, is he's got to stay on the floor. He's gotten injured a lot in the past. So I'm excited for Dean Wade. I hope he can stay healthy, and I hope we get to see whatever the maximized version of him is. Moving on to what was probably the main thing that got everyone excited last night was a stellar performance from Evan Mobley. Now, I've jokingly called it a breakout, but it was everything you want to see from him. Again, just preseason, so we're not going to get carried away, but he started off 17 points in his first 11 minutes of that game, going after it in a way we don't see very often from him. He was empowered. He looked more free within the offense than we normally see from him, whether that's pushing after a rebound, going coast to coast, which he would do every once in a while throughout his last few seasons, but he did it a couple times this game. facing up and attacking off the dribble, some acrobatic finishes around the rim, which you can do stuff like that when you're attacking downhill rather than catching it in the dunker spot and going up from a standstill. When you're, attacking someone off the dribble, you can do a left hand jam off the wrong foot like we saw, or, that wild alley-oop finish, which didn't count, which is really stupid. I think the NBA's rules for fouls on lob attempts are really dumb. It should have been an end one, but regardless, a great finish. We even saw some inverted pick and rolls, which we've been calling for. We had one where Max Strus set him the screen. He set a screen for Allen. And so just an all-around great night for Mobley, and I hope we get to see more of that. Corey, what did you think of the way Mobley looked?
I thought this was a very natural level of aggression for Evan Mobley in the sense that if you go back to that Boston series when people were like, wow, Mobley's being really aggressive in the final games of that Boston series, it was really that the Cavs were kind of force feeding him the ball. And it was a little more artificial in that sense, I think, where it's just a bunch of at the elbow in the post and then letting Evan run from there. This was a lot more free flowing. And like you were mentioning before, like Mobley's brought the ball down on breaks before, but I feel like there's been a lot of times where if it doesn't work, he kind of looks like the deer in headlights and then feels like he gets trapped almost instantly. But this was just a huge step up in terms of the comfort that I think he had. Like you can tell this is something that they've been working on in training camp and really emphasizing to empower him in these types of possessions, because there wasn't really any of those moments where you kind of thought he had the deer in headlights look. It was more just an assertive aggression. Like I think of the one where he took it on the bottom corner and then just ran past two defenders and dunked it in transition. That was, I think if we saw that last year, we all would have flipped out. And even though it was like a huge deal in this game, it's in the flow of the game. It honestly got to the point where you just were expecting him to be that level of aggressive. So if this is like the version of Evan Mobley we're going to have, where it feels like his points are more natural and not artificially generated, and the offense runs through him at this level, it's going to take a lot of the burden off of Donovan Mitchell, I feel like, in this offense, where we don't need Donovan Mitchell to go through a streak of a month where he needs to score around 40 points for the Cavs offense to feel like it has a pulse to it. This could be something where he could step up to be the number 2 option. This sounds a lot like a little extreme. It's just like with a performance like this, though, like you want to kind of see like how you could forecast it realistically. I'm not saying Mobley's going to be a 25 point a night player. Like if he ended up playing more of the game, his stats would have probably led more that way, but just him even having this type of mentality obviously unlocks so much more of the offense for the Cavs and doesn't make it feel like Mobley his offense is going to be as much of a slog.
Yeah, it was just a great approach from him. I mean, so many of his shot attempts just felt like in the past we would have seen him pick up his dribble and look to pass it to Donovan and reset the offense or stuff like that. Or, after a rebound, maybe he'd start pushing it and then he'd realize there's not an opening and he'd give it to a guard. Last night, he was just all gas, no breaks. Like even if he missed, I think he airballed like a running hook shot or something. And it's like, go for it, do things, try things. This is what we've been saying. It's like, just be involved in the offense, have the freedom to fail, have the freedom to miss a 3-pointer, try handling the ball and see what you can do. And I thought that, early results are he looked really good doing it. Now, I think we're going to see some growing pains as we move forward. It's really easy in the preseason to do this stuff. Again, how it translates to the regular season is the most important thing, but the approach was just everything that you wanted to see, and hope that he remains confident moving forward. As for the rest of the core four, I don't have much of a takeaway. Donovan looked great. Allen looked the same. Garland was shooting 3-pointers with some volume, but again, it's preseason. I do think that it's the same thing I've said for a long time. I just want him to take a pull-up 3 every time his defenders and drop coverage, just about any time he has daylight. And he did that last night, so that was good. Again, preseason, so you never know. But are there any other takeaways that you had? Because I want to get into Jaylen Tyson and some of the two-way guys who we saw in the fourth quarter. But was there anything from the starters or the main rotational players, Corey, that you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, with Mobley, another thing, I know the stats, you just look at the box score, you'll see 0 for 2 from 3, and we're not a podcast that's really pushing that Evan Mobley needs to hit the 3 to make a difference offensively kind of thing, but the jumper looks significantly better than it has in past seasons. Like we've seen all of the propaganda of like how he's worked on his shot, and it's like we've talked about it before, Tony, where it's like you kind of have to nitpick the mechanics to kind of notice the difference, but it looked a lot more natural in this game. And even though he went 0 for 2, it's something where even if that release is a little smoother and a little quicker, it's going to help him a lot more to take those types of opportunities. And I wouldn't expect him game to game to go more than 2 to 3 3-point attempts a game within the flow of an offense. But that was something that was big. And with Garland, another thing that I feel like is going to be interesting to see in this preseason is to see if he gets back to being aggressive and trying to get to the basket, because once he lost the weight last season, he mostly became relegated to the 3-point threat. And if that shot wasn't falling, he just simply was too weak at this point to kind of fight off contact to the rim. And he was much more aggressive before the injury in doing that. So it's something to keep in mind and pay attention to see if that mentality has returned for Garland. It seemed like in this last game that it was more of like a 3-point game for him still, but you would like to think that as he gets more comfortable again in this new weight that he's back at, that maybe we'll be seeing more of an aggression from that standpoint.
One of the things that they've emphasized in camp is trying to get those more corner threes. And I think him and Mitchell, especially I think in their run in the first quarter, did a pretty good job of always trying to fill that corner. And it helps when you're using the fifth guy in that core 4 grouping, and he's not just stationed in the corner like Max Strus and Isaac Okoro have been at various points in time. So I think that's something to really look for, and that's something that I was pretty encouraged by with what I saw yesterday. So do you think that's worth pointing out?
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure. I think just all around the movement away from the play seemed a lot better than in the past. The way that they spaced the floor seemed better. Even just having, again, we talk about Mobley's expanded role. If you have him above the break, even if he doesn't have the ball, that's pulling his defender out a little bit, because he is in these actions where he's screening for other players. He's operating triple handoffs. You're running those inverted pick and rolls, where in the past it was all right, have him stand in the dunker spot or stand in the corner where no one's going to guard him. Have him above the break, involved in the play, because then his defender has to be either at the level of the screen or in a drop coverage, or his defender's just doing things. He's not just standing there ignoring him. So I think that is really encouraging. As for the rest of the rotational players, one thing that I forgot to hit on, Georges Niang doesn't look any different. I thought maybe, we all for a second there thought maybe he was entering the season in better shape. Maybe he's going to have a little bit of a bounce back season. Just the 3-point shot would come back around. Maybe he'd be more active on the glass. Now, it is just preseason. I have to say that over and over again, but he didn't look any different.
I don't know.
I wasn't expecting much, but he wasn't bad last night. It's not like he was horrible, but it was just the same exact experience as last year. And I'm just trying to mentally prepare myself for another round of this.
Yeah,
I thought that he looked pretty decent, honestly. And I'm,
this
number
is
one,
quite the take.
The number one Georges Niang hater.
Well, he airballed the shot.
Yeah, that was bad.
He just doesn't look like he's in any better shape.
He was 0 for 4 from 3. I thought he looked like he was in considerably better shape. He got 5 rebounds. I don't know if he got 5 rebounds all of last year. So I don't know. I think that he was mostly okay. I was if he goes 2 for 4 from 3 instead of 0 for 4, then you're like, oh wow, he scored, what is that? Would be a 14-point game, 5 rebounds in about 16, 17 minutes. That's that's all you could ever possibly want. And I thought that we were kind of close to that. And also, one of the things that really hurt all those bench lineups is that one of the things that I think they do really well is that the Cavs, all of their bench guys play really well with some hybrid starting groups. He was out there with there was a time he was out there with Wade,
Jerome,
and he was he was the center at times. He was there with Tristan. It's he's gonna look bad in those situations. So I don't.
Okay, well,
I actually
heard
thought
it here first. Jackson's considering some Niang real estate. Apparently,
I am not. I think that I don't think that he should be in the rotation. I'm just saying that I think that you were just being really, really hard on him I think this was this would have been a great performance last year. So
To be fair, the bar
Understood.
is extremely low.
Yeah, I was going to say the bar is low.
I think that's another thing with when it comes to Niang too, is like Tony has been pushing the Niang comeback season propaganda, obviously.
Not entirely. I did see someone on Twitter say that like I was pushing that. I was like, I just said that he could have a better 3-point shooting year. The rest of his game isn't going to change. But
yeah,
go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. It's like Niang's at the point in his career where we can't be here expecting like maybe this will be the season that Niang decides to give a shit when it comes to rebounding. Like it's not something that's going to happen like overnight. It's like if Niang is at least remotely efficient from 3, like he showed spurts of in his time in Philly and in Utah, then that's where the value is going to come from. And the fact that he's actually in shape-ish for Niang is also just a sign that things at least won't be as dire as they got to last season. Again, though, it's like it's all perspective when it comes to Niang. Like the bar is low. Do you want him to truly be an impact player on this team? Because if he has to be, then we're kind of in the same situation we were in last season, where if George Niang is kind of a needle swinger for your bench performance, then that's the problem within itself.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I want to hit on really 2 more guys real quick, and then we'll talk about some of the two-way players and wrap up. Very quickly, just rapid fire. Second unit last night didn't look too great. Again, it was that 5-in, 5-out substitutions. They were running some weird lineups. It's not a big deal. But Karis LeVert stat that I saw, which really isn't that related to last night, but it's just something because I thought Karis LeVert played good last night. But something that was funny is that I saw this stat from RealCavsFans.com. LeVert last season was a plus 15 in wins and a minus 12 in their losses, which just sounds exactly right. I mean, he's either amazing or horrible. It's Karis LeVert. We know who he is at this point. The other person who I want to hit on with the second unit, this one hurts me a little bit, but I got to say, Ty Jerome, a little underwhelming. And to be honest with you, I kind of expected him to be underwhelming for many points of the season. That's just kind of the type of player he is. He doesn't really stand out one way or another most of the time.
Didn't you just make a video about how good
and
if
you watch
now
the
you're
video,
saying, oh yeah,
no,
so
here's the thing.
You're just pushing fake propaganda. You're just
if you watch the video, I said that he is a guy who doesn't really stand out one way or another, and that's why he's a third string point guard and not like a legitimate rotational player, because he kind of just exists most of the time. And that's what he did last night. What I will say is there was one thing that he did that I liked, and I would like to see him continue to do this, is that he was pushing the tempo. I think he should be like his goal this season is he should say, I want to be the diet, all these brand version of Ricky Rubio, where he's not going to give you any of the flair or excitement that Rubio did, because Rubio was great in the Cavs uniform. But can he push the second unit to play to breakneck speed, get the ball moving, and orchestrate the offense? I don't think he'll be anywhere as fun or as impactful as Rubio, but I could see Jerome attempting to replicate that dynamic with the bench, because he was pushing the ball up the floor and just those go-ahead passes, getting them moving. That's the one thing that I liked about his game.
Yeah, it's rough for Jerome, but luckily the Craig Porter Jr. saga really helped damper whatever. The real estate is being overshadowed by the Craig Porter market right now. So Ty Jerome still has that MVP of September hanging over his head to keep the stock
going for him.
By the way, who's handing that award? Because I'm not having the access. We don't have the access that Jackson has, but I'd like to know firsthand if there was anyone who witnessed what the MVP of September legitimately looked like, and was anyone else in the facility at the time that award was handed out, because that was so disappointing. I was force-fed Tony's Ty Jerome. He's going to be a game breaker for this bench. I don't know why I believed it. And then my eyes definitely didn't believe it when I watched it last night.
You just gotta wait and see. They're gonna replicate the MVP of September at some point. You know, they're just finding a way to get that to translate to October, November. You know, the months where they actually play basketball. That's the goal with Ty Jerome.
I don't know what Ty Jerome's Zillow price is right now, but this is a buyer's market for Ty Jerome. If you're sitting on his
get in now.
If you're sitting on his Prism rookie card, now's the time to keep acquiring.
If you want a guy who's going to be basically unnoticeable 90% of the time, and then every once in a while have like a 15.5 assist game off the bench, Ty Jerome's your guy.
Unfortunately for Ty Jerome, he's not in his Golden State time where he absolutely eviscerated us, but maybe we can just show, maybe that's why he did so well. He was only facing Cavs and he seems to thrive in that environment.
Apparently, yeah.
I do not appreciate this complete 180 from you. This is just disgusting. This is despicable behavior. Like
this is how you know Jackson doesn't
be
really. He's not a real
yourself.
YouTube follower. This is right on.
I have a lot of stuff on my plate, so I can't say I watch everything, but just the texts, you know, the way that you've talked about him.
There's
I call
the takes that you send to the group chat, and there's the clickbaity thumbnails and titles, and then there's the real basketball analysis.
So I will say
that's where the gap is.
So, you know, we do write for Fear the Sword as well, and I was coming home from they did media day differently, where like Friday they did the GM and coach media day. I called Tony on the way home, was like, what do you want to do? And it was like the first thing out of Tony's mouth is like, I want to do the Ty Jerome MVP buzz. And it was like, all right, yeah, sure. That's article number 1 you can write. So,
and it was a great story.
It was a great story. It got a lot of views.
People want to know who Ty Jerome is. And I was just trying to inform them. He's a good third string guy.
If only we had a second string guy.
Well, yeah, that's maybe Craig, the problem.
You can only keep one, Craig Porter Jr. or Ty Jerome.
Oh,
for this season,
I would probably say Ty Jerome. Unfortunately,
no.
Sorry.
How far we fallen?
I listen, man. It's been a rough 6 months for Craig Porter. I'm not out on him, but Jackson made me pick. So
what happens in
Jerome,
Vegas?
My flag has been planted. It didn't. It translated to the first game of the season here. Now we are running short on time, so we have to talk about Jaylen Tyson, and I also have to push a little bit, just a little bit of a JT Thor agenda in a second. But we got to talk about Jaylen Tyson because he was probably the most anticipated player. If you think Ty Jerome was getting a lot of hype in training camp, Jaylen Tyson was getting a full propaganda run, and I will say, he didn't look too great in this first game. I don't think he was, it wasn't the worst performance ever, but it was kind of rough. He looked like a rookie. He looked a little flustered. He got jammed up at the rim a handful of times, just not really going anywhere with the ball. Couldn't get his outside shot to fall. Looked unsure of himself, and that's to be expected. It's his first game, first preseason game. I will say, Tyson, even though he wasn't scoring, he played solid defense. He was rebounding. He actually led the team in rebounding despite only playing 12 minutes. So he showed some of that scrappiness on that end of the floor. And so I can't really take too much away from this, but I like that he was doing those little things because he's not going to be on the floor being asked to play the Karis LeVert role right away. He's not going to be asked to score 20 points. They're going to want him to rebound, to play defense, to play without the ball. And while he didn't do too much off the ball this game, again, I don't think it was a great performance. It was nothing. I'm not worried about it. I think he just had some nerves. And overall, I was encouraged by the mentality and the approach that he took to this game.
I feel like the results kind of panned out the way that the first few games of Summer League panned out, where offensively it was evident that stuff really wasn't clicking for him. It was kind of like searching for the right way to fit into the lineups, even with the secondary role. But I think his tenacity on rebounding and filling in and checking in those other boxes was what really stood out to me. I wouldn't say I'm like, oh, we're so in on the Jaylen Tyson experience of him kind of being that guy for us off the bench. Nothing I really saw there has led to what I've seen on Twitter, where people are ready to crown him as a dark horse, like rookie first team or second team type player.
I wouldn't go that far.
But overall, like, it's something that he can bring to the table that we don't really see with a lot of these Cav bench players, where it's like, all right, well, if Sam Merrill's shot's not falling, then we can't really do anything else with it. If Craig Porter can't really stretch the floor, nothing is really going to help because the defenses know how to negate it. Where at least with Tyson, like, if he can keep up this mentality of like, hey, obviously offensively, I'm still trying to like figure it out, but I'll impact the game by playing solid defense, being the person to grab boards on both ends, be an active, like just an aggravating player. That alone is something that this Cavs team doesn't necessarily have coming off the bench right now. So that's something that could help him slot into the rotation quicker than I think some of us are expecting him to.
Yeah, and I think you said that perfectly. I mean, it's just finding a way to impact the game other ways than just scoring. I think, it wasn't the best game ever, but he certainly managed to be an impactful player, and he helped them rally back at the end. One one player, last player we have to talk about, who's kind of the catalyst for their little comeback near the end, was JT Thor. I'm kind of in on this guy. I actually really like the way that he played. I absolutely think he has great size and athleticism. He's agile. He's nimble. He moves very well for his size. And considering the Cavs don't have much front court depth, I imagine he'll get an opportunity at some point. Like at some point in the season, you're going to look at Tristan Thompson and be like, we want to run him back out there, or do we want to give the two-way guy a shot? And I think his energy in that game, his rebounding, his defense, he was putting a lot of pressure on the rim. He hit his first 3-pointer of the game. Like I'm just kind of in on this guy. I think he can be a genuinely helpful player. It's not like he hasn't played in the NBA. He was a rotational player for the Hornets, which might not be saying much, but it's not like this is a guy who went undrafted and hasn't played any minutes or anything. Like we know that JT Thor can be on an NBA court. And so I do think at some point he's going to get an opportunity with the Cavs. And last night was a good example of what he could provide.
It's easy to eye roll and be like, oh man, JT Thor had like a decent night, whoop-de-doo. But the thing is, like, the Cavs gave Damian Jones a fair amount of runway last year, considering how poor the results really were, which kind of indicates to you that even though Tristan played well to start the year for reasons that we don't need to disclose, all right, we've moved past it. The Cavs desperately need someone who can fill in that back spot, and it's not necessarily a night-to-night basis. There's going to be situations where one of the two bigs really can't play, and then they need someone who at least can hold down those minutes. And I truly think this team, even though they did bring back Tristan, isn't obviously crossing their fingers that they're going to have to break the Tristan glass in case of emergency. That should be something that's only saved for the garbage time or in dire situations. Like JT Thor provided enough to me where I feel like this team is confident that when they'll need him, though, they can use him at least a little bit. He brings something else that we don't necessarily have, like you described, with his athleticism. Quick movement is something that none of the other bigs on this roster outside of obviously Evan and Jarrett really have. So just to have something that remotely resembles that type of play defensively is huge.
I do want to just say we should calm down a little bit because he was playing in essentially garbage time against G League players. I don't disagree.
Tristan Thompson was playing too, and he didn't look that good.
Yeah, but he was playing. I mean, he was still playing with like other rotation NBA players. So
I agree with what you're saying.
I do think that there were reasons why the Cavs were able to pick him up on a two-way deal. I think, there is a situation where he is like the best third big that doesn't really play too often, hopefully, if everyone's healthy. So I do think you can talk yourself into that. I just don't know if we can see anything from that game and be like, yes, this is what we need, because one of the biggest difference between G League and the NBA is that the center play and what you need from a center is just completely different. And I think that somebody of JT Thor's skill level, if he's playing with the charge, he's going to look like an absolute monster, just because his physicality that he brings is just not something that G League players can really handle well. And I think he could possibly be a tweener. Like, that's kind of what we saw when he was in Charlotte. Like, this guy should be better than he is, but you kind of see why he's not. So I just want to, the defense was good. He shot the ball well. I really liked that steal at the top of the key that led to an almost dunk. He got fouled on that. But let's just slow it down just a little bit.
Yeah, no, when I see Thor, though, it's like I don't know how you feel about it, Jackson, because you've obviously seen it more closely. But when I think of what the Cavs are kind of hoping what Isaiah Mobley could have been, because I feel like what he kind of showed is what I think the Cavs were just hoping to see an inkling of through Mobley in his stint with the Cavaliers. But I don't think we obviously saw that, hence why he wasn't brought back on another two-way deal with the team. I think if Thor can at least touch on some of that stuff, it gives him a fair chance to at least kind of build out a roadmap to being on this team.
Well, he can play five, and Isaiah can't play five. So that's kind of the biggest difference. Whereas, and I think that's kind of where they did do Isaiah a disservice, because he really was just in the G League just kind of like, hey, go out there and like dominate, and he did. but he dominated at the center. And then it wasn't really until like the very end of last year that it was like, oh, well, you're going to have to be like a 4. So why don't you actually like take these shots and like really play the 4, whereas you're not just running continuous high pick and rolls and just like posting up, 6'2" G League guards. So I think, I am still believe in Isaiah, but you can see Thor's fit on this team much better because the Cavs never really needed a backup 4 as much as they needed like a competent center that you could run out for a couple minutes.
And that's the selling point, is that he looks like he could be a competent center when they really haven't had many backup centers who could actually be out on the floor. Look, he just turned 22 years old. He's played 165 games in the NBA, and he wasn't great in those games, but that's just why I mentioned, like, it's not just one preseason game. I think the Cavs probably will end up being able to rely on him in those moments where, listen, if it's, do we play Tristan or do we give JT Thor some minutes? I think they'll lean towards JT Thor near the back end of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being brought up on a standard contract if they don't address their need for some front court depth there. It's not saying he's going to be in the playoff rotation or anything, and I'm not trying to get too carried away. I am in on him being probably their best backup center on the roster. Bar's low, but I think it's true. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Like I said at the top, if you enjoy the show and you want to support us, then go ahead and follow on all podcast platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and leave a comment, drop a like, do it all because we really appreciate it. And with that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. I don't have any questions for you, Brian. Sorry. Caught me off guard.